We have Commissioner Sankey, and he has some remarks for us to start with.
Okay, I won't be long, so some of you are already in the queue. It's wonderful for us to be in Nashville. This is something we had attempted to schedule, and were interrupted by COVID, and so to actually be here with our media days in a year when the season will begin for us in Nashville, with Vanderbilt hosting Hawaii August 26th, and then the next week Tennessee playing at Nissan Stadium against Virginia, and later that day Alabama A&M being hosted by Vanderbilt for the Commodores game 2. It's the perfect time for us to be here. I had an opportunity to honor members of the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department for their heroism on March 27th, and then the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of our successes, what our future looks like, as next year will be a 16-team league. We're going to have change in the college football playoff, change in our primary broadcast partner, and then dealing with a couple of the key issues that are on our agenda right now. How do we manage in the most healthy way possible name, image, and likeness activity involving our student athletes, and then some of the pressures around legalized sports gambling that have created some real concerns about abusive and threatening behavior directed at participants, be they student athletes, coaches, even our game officials, resulting from somebody who may end up on the wrong side of a particular wager. Work to raise those issues, work with our congressional and state representatives to reasonable solutions, and look forward to the season, but happy to answer any questions that may be on your minds today.
We'll go to the left on the third row.
Hey, Dean Legge from Dog Post. Wanted to ask you about something you actually touched on a second there, which was changing broadcast partners. Bob Iger talked, I think it was earlier this week or last week, about what could be happening at Disney. How important is it to be on broadcast for the SEC? You've had a long history with CBS, and now you, I guess, hope to have one with ABC. Thanks.
The specific question about being on broadcast TV, I think that's enormously important, as the broadcast television universe is now over 130 million households in this country, and you've seen a reduction in the number of cable households, really based on contracts that date back to 2008. For us, the only way for us to access more broadcast TV with the opportunity had was with ABC. I won't bore you with the details. Moving forward, beginning in the 24 season, you could see broadcast TV, so the ABC network, on a particular Saturday carry a noon Eastern kickoff game, a 3:30 Eastern kickoff game, and a Saturday primetime game. That's not something we've had for decades. We've had the CBS game of the week, essentially, and the rest has all been driven through cable providers, ESPN and the SEC network, at least in the last, since 2014. So an enormously important piece of that puzzle was the access to broadcast TV, which is part of what we're looking forward to with that move to ABC in 24.
Right side, third row.
Chris Williams, CBS Oklahoma. Commissioner, what were some of the specific things, or what are some of the specific things about Oklahoma and Texas that excite you and make you feel like they're a great addition? And then do you think Norman, Austin are going to have the game day atmosphere to match the rest of the SEC?
I've not been to football games in either Norman or Austin, but I've seen enough to know the answer is yes. Actually, I take it back. I was at the Alabama-Texas game last year, and that felt like us, felt like home. And that atmosphere exists in Norman. I've had any number of chances or opportunities to watch games broadcast from Norman. I think what they bring is, from a football standpoint, historically successful programs. I think over the history of college football, both in the top 5 from a victory standpoint. When you leave football and look at what both programs have achieved, particularly in the spring, from national championships, the last 4 national championships determined in softball, outdoor track and field, and baseball, all involve our 24-25 membership between Oklahoma softball, Florida men's outdoor track and field, Texas women's outdoor track and field, and LSU baseball. That's who we are, that's who we're going to be, and I think that excitement goes from the first soccer game in August through football season into basketball to the success of our spring sports. And I think part of what you'll see with swimming and diving and with track and field in particular is whenever we have a conference championship moving forward, those will be international caliber competitions.
Left side, fourth row.
Doug Amos, ESPN, the Ticket Montgomery. Commissioner, two-parter kind of. Since you have the bridge schedule in 24 set, is there a time frame on perhaps something more permanent? And then with the college football playoff agreement about to come up again in 25-26, that contract, do you foresee any major changes in the playoff moving forward?
And this is just for my own nomenclature purposes, the 24 schedule is the 24 schedule. It's not a bridge schedule for our purposes. And it allows us to pivot off of that schedule. If we remain at 8, we now have a template for how we might move forward. If we don't and we increase to 9, we also have the ability to have continuity of matchups. There'll be some repeat games at site. So a little bit different than what we did when Missouri and Texas A&M joined in 2012, 2013 with what we did call a bridge schedule. From a time standpoint, we have some time. We'll gather at the end of the summer to look at where we are, the feedback around the 8-game schedule. I think you've seen a progression of thought, at least in my experience. When we announced the 8-game schedule in Destin, plenty of feedback. Hey, they should play 9. They don't play enough tough games. And then when we announced the 8-game schedules in mid-June, I think there was a wow moment to say, wow, every one of those schedules is incredibly challenging with the depth of competition in this league. So we're going to go take a step back, look at what we did, make sure we have tiebreakers that are aligned properly as we head into the 24 season. You asked about the college football playoff. We're going to have expected change for the 24 season with the expansion to 12. Once we get through the 25 season, based on where we stand right now, there are no contracts in place. I'm not going to predict change, but there's certainly an opportunity for additional thought around what the college football playoff might look like for the 26th season and beyond. And all of that's important for the Southeastern Conference as we make decisions about our own future schedules.
Right side, front row.
AP Stedham, AP and Kelly, as we see at syndicated radio. Commissioner, do you recall when you started to think about the NIL issue and people in the general public, they're saying that's the last resort to turn to Washington. And can you tell the people why college athletics has to turn to Washington to solve this particular issue and why the commissioners couldn't get together and come up with something?
Well, we've been subject to repeated antitrust lawsuits and have one around NIL-related issues right now. And in those courts, the NCAA model has not prevailed. When California adopted its state law in 2019, there are those of us who thought that might put us into litigation under a dormant commerce clause perspective. Ultimately, the NCAA Board of Governors decided not to pursue that avenue. That put us into a congressional conversation, whether you like that or not. And at that time, we were clear that not simply resisting the onset of name, image, and likeness, but recognizing the wrong way to do that is with a patchwork of state laws, because eventually it was going to be a competitive endeavor between states. I described today in my remarks as a race to the bottom for competitive purposes. That's where we are. You actually have states that, when we've looked and asked, have never had enforcement action around what may have been good state laws. They've now backed away from those state laws. And a number, I think New York was the most recent, have said associations like the NCAA or conferences cannot enforce their own even reasonable NIL policies. So you're left with the inability to govern. To resolve that, whether you want to be in conversation with Congress or not, you're going to be in a conversation with Congress to set a national standard. That's why we're there. I don't assume that that will happen quickly. I would like it to. I think I can make the case that it needs to. And from my perspective, we have to be attentive to Congress. We have to be attentive to the courts, to the states, to conference policy and the NCAA policy. And I think there are five fronts, if you will, in this conversation, any of which could provide some level of resolution, but the only one that can provide a complete, comprehensive resolution is congressional action.
Final question, front row.
Chris Farble in KSU 81 FM Columbia. So you talked about NIL and of course the big TV deal coming up with exclusively with ESPN and ABC. So with the current state of NIL and what's going on with this major new TV deal, Do you think there's a possibility that the SEC or even any other conference could potentially start revenue sharing some of that TV money with the players? Do you think there's a possibility that revenue sharing could be beneficial for the SEC?
I think that's an incomplete question. We've asked our universities and their athletic programs to actually look at the support provided to student athletes right now. That volume of support, when you take away certain elements, but think about educational benefits, medical support, nutritional support, you'll see ranges from about 120,000 per student athlete up to about 180,000. Simply asking a question about something called revenue sharing doesn't contemplate the application of Title IX to that question. It doesn't recognize our effort to support between 19 and I think 24 sports on our campuses and the funding realities there. What we have done though is adapt. So you've seen in the last decade a student athlete receives a scholarship that has a cost of attendance payment attached. That's between $4,000 and $5,000. The outcome of the Alston case, there's another roughly $6,000 that's provided. In addition to their opportunity to access name, image, and likeness opportunities. There's not a better time to be a student athlete than right now. And before we simply observe that things like revenue sharing or pay for play should happen, there needs to be a lot more thought about the implications and the loss of opportunity associated with those concepts.
Commissioner, thank you very much for
You're
your
welcome.
time.
Yep, thank you.